The start point for this one is a pretty uninspiring drum machine, really. This is a Yamaha RX-11, late 80s, early 90s, kind of FM sampled drum machine, not particularly inspiring. The sounds aren't inspiring, not a lot of sounds on it. Kind of standard late 80s, early 90s kind of thing. As you can see, not in particularly good nick. Your average kind of eBay buy for, I think it was under 50 quid or something. So what I thought was just to attempt to kind of try and make it earn its keep, really. So what I've done is I've just made, just in Cubase on the grid, just made a very simple pattern. Nothing particularly complicated. Kick, snare, open hat, closed hat and the clap. Not doing anything complicated. This is the dry signal. And what I've done, it's got stereo outs. So the left output is going straight into the mixer and what you're hearing is just the dry drum machine. Again, not particularly inspiring. So what I've done is with the other output is I've run it in to the Electric's filter factory, which hardware filter unit, it's a stereo unit. Obviously I'm only using a mono feed, and basically what I've done is run it into a bandpass filter, 100% wet, and it's also being modulated with a saw wave that is synced up via MIDI to the drum machine. So it's being modulated in sync with the drum machine. And basically, if we just play that sounds like this. So that is just the filtered 100% wet sound. Again, if we're just looking for just a filtered sound, just an affected sound, it's quite nice, it's quite wet, it's a kind of sloppy wet sound, it's okay. It's certainly possibly, you know, just to layer on top of another loop, more preferable to that. I kind of sitting here and thinking it's okay, but it's quite thin. So what we'll do is we'll mix the original 80s sound, 80s, 90s sound back in again. So what we get is a nice kind of mix of the two. And so what the original sound is doing is filling out the loop, but what you've got is the filtered sound is kind of adding a slight different texture to it. Again, what I've done in between the output from the drum machine into the filter, in line, I've got this little box here. And what this little unassuming silver box is basically a hardware bit reducer. Of course you could use a software bit reducer. I'm lucky enough to have a hardware one. It works on some kind of arcane sample and hold system that I don't truly understand. I'd like to explain it to you, but to be brutally honest, you just stomp on it and it does its thing. Again, it's quite subtle, but it just adds an extra texture to it. So what I'll do, if I take, let's take the dry signal out, I'm also going to bypass, let's turn that off, I'll bypass the filtering. That's the dry signal going to the filter, that's with the bit crusher off, that's with the bit crusher on. So as you can see, it's got that classic bit crusher, it's slightly phasey, slightly, well, bit crushed, to be brutally honest. Nothing more I can say about that, but we stick the filter back on. To me, when it's off, when it's on, it's taken slightly some of the wetness out. It is very subtle, I'll give you, but to be brutally honest, for me, it does something to it, and the whole point of all of this is if there's something there that attracts it to your ears, then it's right. It doesn't matter if it's subtle, it doesn't matter if it's major. For me, it works, so I'm just gonna, I'm gonna leave it in. We've got dry signal from the crappy 80s drum box. We've got a fully affected bandpass signal through here. Now, to me, it's made it a lot more interesting. We could leave it there, but because this drum machine has got a full set of outputs for each instrument, so it's got an output for cowbell, hi-hat, the kick drum or whatever. What I've also done is taken the output for just the hi-hat and I've run it through another couple of stomp pedals. This is a bass guitar synthesizer that's normally used on bass guitar, obviously for making that kind of Bootsy Collins wet synthesized sound. And I've also run it through a delay pedal. And basically, if I just take these two out, what you get is a 303. And all this is the hi-hat pattern. Just on here, it's an 8th hi-hat pattern, straight 8th hi-hat pattern. The second hi-hat on each, is slightly down velocity, just that's the way I program. And all it's doing is going through this bass synthesizer, which, as well as it's basically an envelope follower and a filter. So you're getting that wet sound, then through a delay, and all that is the hi-hat. So you've got that on this channel. Then we drop in the band pass again, and to me, all from that drum machine, you could just leave that as is. Then get a 909 kick. You're starting to build up a new loop. Trying to think of ways to freshen up sounds and sequences of using your own gear rather than going out and just spending hard-earned cash on something new when you kind of hit a brick wall creatively. Playing around with the drum machine, and of course first thing that came to my head was all a drum machine via MIDI, if you export it, if it's got a MIDI out, everything that you send out is note data. Normally a kick drum is on C1 or C0, snare will be on D1, D0. All it's sending out is note data. So, following that thought along, connecting MIDI out of a drum machine, hardware, software, whichever, into the MIDI in of a synth, you can create new patterns, new sequences from a new source. So instead of using a sequencer, your DAW, or an arpeggiator, why not attempt using a hardware or software drum machine to run your synth? So this is what we've tried to do. Again, just trying to kind of freshen up using your own gear that you own, rather than just going out and spending money on new gear. We've got this is just a standard pattern on this Jomox X-Bass 09. Very nice analog drum machine. Really doesn't matter what kind of drum machine it is. Doesn't matter if it's analog or not. We're not going to use it for the sounds. Just for you, this is what it sounds like. There's the pattern. This Jomox is actually only using bass, snare, closed hat, hi-hat, and there's a little bit of hidden percussion in there as well. Not necessarily perfect for this job, but it works. The more notes you're using, the more percussion that's hidden away, obviously the more notes that are going to be sent to your synth. But just to begin with, we'll use a nice simple pattern that's going. So that's the beat that's going on. If we take the beat off, that MIDI data is being sent to the Move Little Fatty, and basically that sounds like this. So all it's doing is sending that beat data, those note data, the note on and off, it's just going via normal run-of-the-mill MIDI straight into the Little Fatty. And what you're getting is, well, basically something that I wouldn't play. It's got that kind of arpeggiator kind of feel to it, but it's almost got that gallopy feel to it as well. It's got a kind of, it's the hi-hats that are triggering off. Now obviously the Little Fatty is mono, so wherever anything's on here, I can see just now that the kick and the closed hi-hat are all triggering on the same thing. The snare drum will be triggering also on the closed hat. You're only going to get one note trigger on here. If you use the polysynth, obviously you're going to get more than one note. You're going to get a kind of semi-chord, which may work, may not. You might get some dissonance in there, which might be nice on it. So what we're getting is a completely new kind of sequence on the synth. Of course then, decide you like it or not, grab hold of the filter, rhythmic with it. You see my rhythm is atrocious. Of course, take away the hardware sync, there's nothing stopping you from doing this into your DAW. All you're doing is feeding it MIDI data. You can feed the same MIDI data into a soft synth, then automate the filter. Automate the filter with the same MIDI data, and you can be opening and closing the filter automatically, so you're not relying on my incredibly bad timing to open and close the filter. And then, within the loop, you've got filter data, you've got resonance data. Take it to wherever you want. You can take it down to make it into percussion. Rather than make it that synthy thing, you make it slightly more percussive. Or we can just take the resonance off, bring through to that kind of synthy style. Again, just swap patterns. And it seems to have MIDI changed the preset on the little fatty. Now, personally, I think that's great. I haven't done that. So much, and the secret is, so much of what you hear is accident. And it's important. Little accidents. Now, I might think we've changed sequence, we've changed the noise. Now, I didn't know that was going to happen. I like this noise. This noise is working for me. We've got this industrial, we've got this kind of like hard bass noise. Now, for me, that kind of accident is what it's all about. I'm liking that. No, I didn't know that was going to happen. That's not rehearsed. I wish it was. Wish it was. Things like that. These happy accidents just by swapping patterns. For some reason, obviously, I've got the MIDI change. The program change is enabled on the drum machine, so it's going to change every time I change the pattern. It's going to change the preset that I've got on the little fatty. And again, because this isn't note programmed, you're only actually using 4 or 5 different notes. So the notes are always going to be the same. But what you're getting is a much more rhythmic pattern than perhaps that you program yourself. So within those 4 or 5 notes, which is quite constrained, but that's not necessarily a bad thing, you're going to get this bass kind of sequence. Of course, again, using the Moog Little Fatty is obviously a mono synth, so you're only ever going to trigger one note at a time. You start moving these patterns onto polysynths, where you can trigger more than one note at a time. You're going to get a different feel. These ones were in true Blue Peter style, some stuff that I prepared earlier, and these are done with the Novation K Station, and again, triggered with the X-Bass 09. These will appear on the cover DVD as samples, but I'll just give you a quick burst. There's the original pattern, slightly slower. Again, you can muck with tempo as well, because even at a slower tempo, you still, if you've got a lot of hi-hat going on, you're still going to have that speed of the notes on the hi-hat. So there's the beat pattern, and then you've got again, there are 3 or 4 different ones, because that pattern went over 4 bars and had a slight change and had a fill on it. Again, another slightly faster pattern, again with the K Station. Slightly more rhythmic. Same pattern, but then moving into a more 303 kind of wet sound, and then now for me that's an acid loop. That's a 303 acid loop. Again, we're not programming it. That's a beat. Once again, go back to the theme of creating sounds either with gear you've got or you know, on a budget or just trying to look at a new way of creating sounds, we're going to use an effects rig to create some more kind of ambient atmospheric sounds. Rather than trigger these sounds or use the sound source from a synth or a drum machine or anything, I thought I'd show you one of my favourite little boxes that I actually made myself, which is just a little passive shaker box. As you can see, it's not exactly pretty. All the soldering done by me, as you can see, because it's atrocious. I hope there's no electronics experts watching, because I'm not a great solderer. All you've got here is a Maplin's transducer, or often known as a contact mic. All it is then soldered, in this case, to an RCA, or you could use a jack socket. I've used an RCA just because they're easier to solder to and easier just to connect to the box. It's set, or super glued in this case, into just a little project plastic box. I've then covered it completely in epoxy resin glue, just smeared the glue on, and it's only there to protect the wiring really. It then dries hard. You filled the box up with BB gun pellets that you can buy, you know, at a fishing store. All in all, the thing costs about £4. And once I've done it all up again, I'll show you what it does. Here's our little box done up, as you can hear, filled with little BB pellets, BB gun pellets, little plastic pellets. You can fill up with anything, sand, marbles, you can experiment. Works as an actual shaker. It's a physical shaker. Obviously, it's quite a harsh sound because depending on the size you put in. What you do, connect it to whichever input you've used. There we go. Now, what I've done through this rig at the moment, what we've gone through is quite complicated effects chain. Obviously, you can use whichever effects chain you've got, you know, you've got to hand, because I've got a rack full of Mooga Fugas. First up, again, making another comeback, we've got a stomp box using a synth wah. Again, like a wah wah pedal that runs a movable filter. This one also adds, actually creates a synth as well. So really handy stomp boxes. Whatever you put into them, it's adding that synth effect on top. This one is for guitar. I've also got a bass one. So what it's aimed at is guitarists to play guitar into it and then to get that classic kind of 80s synth sound out. But of course, whatever you put into it, it's going to add that synth sound to it. So I'm going to run it first into the synth wah. From the synth wah, we're going into the Moog delay. The delay's set to actually quite a short delay. From the delay, it's going all the way over here into a PV Univerb, which is another 80s reverb unit. Not a particularly clean and sparkly reverb unit. You may be seeing that there's a theme that continues here. The reverb's quite a large reverb. I've set it on, quite a large hall reverb. From the reverb, it's coming all the way back again, and we're going into the ring modulator. From the ring modulator, we're going into the low pass filter. From the low pass filter, it's coming straight out again. So quite a complicated effects chain. But the thing about this is, because essentially what we're sending is a shaking sound, or the movement on the transducer in here, what you need to do, you need to have either some reverb, long reverb, or you need some delay. Because what the processes need is something to hold on to. If we're just taking the delay out or taking the reverb out, the sound is so short and so harsh, there really isn't enough frequency in there for anything to hold on to. So some nice delay, some nice reverb really gives the sound, gives some frequencies for the processing to really play with. But if I just stomp this on, you can have a listen. So we've kind of got devil breathing going on there. Of course, that's just standard. Start moving, cut off the filter. ramp the resonance up. The other good thing about this, because it's a contact mic, wet, colourful. That's just great.